We'll be speaking with one of President Trump's attorneys coming up, but we want to go right to our panel now for some thoughts on what we've just heard. Susan Page is the Washington bureau chief of USA Today. Jeffrey Goldberg is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. Ed O'Keefe covers politics for The Washington Post and is a CBS News contributor. And Ramesh Ponnuru is a senior editor for the National Review. Susan, I want to start with you. You wrote this week about the Don Jr. revelation, smoke meets fire.
Smoke meets fire. You know, I think this, in the history of this, is written, this will turn out to have been, this past week, a pivotal week, a watershed week, because this was not a report based on anonymous sources or based on Democratic critics or people you don't know. These were emails released by Donald Trump Jr. that showed the Russian government trying to meddle in our election and Donald Trump Jr. eager to meet with them to see if he could get information from them. We don't know if collusion resulted, but we know that there was an eagerness to collude, and it is now impossible for the Trump forces to say there isn't the material to make a legitimate investigation, and it also undercuts all those denials that we've been hearing.
That's right. Ed, Mark Warner said gleeful. Seems like the investigations now also have a whole new activity. He says he wants to talk about it to everybody in that meeting.
Yeah, it just shows you this is why it's going to take so long, because it's just going to require extensive interviews, negotiations with these people to get them to come and either do this behind closed doors or in public. The fact also that he said he wants to get these Comey memos out there at some point and in some fashion, I think signals that he clearly has seen something that he thinks the public would find interesting and perhaps shed a little more light on what was going on. But the tricky thing there, too, is his committee is moving much more aggressively than other committees on the Hill. They're the marquee event. But there are Judiciary Committee investigations, there's the House Oversight Committee that's doing a little bit of work, and then there's the Mueller investigation. So how and what form would it come out and for what reason remains to be seen. But I do think we are getting closer to a point where one of these characters who was at the Trump Tower meeting probably ends up testifying publicly and explaining themselves a little more.
And that was interesting on those Comey memos. The White House certainly does not want those memos out, getting the conversation back to obstruction of justice, which is not one.
And now that Comey's writing a book, frankly, he may not want them out yet either until the book is published. So
we'll be talking to his agent. Ramesh, let me ask you this question, which is, you know, there were all these blanket denials from the White House. Is it possible, or is it probable, that basically there are silos, and that when Kellyanne Conway said there was nobody talked to the Russians, and the vice president said the same thing, they just had no idea what the president's son was doing? And does that put the White House in a tricky position because they try and deny something, and then 4 new stages of the story comes out because the president's son wasn't forthcoming at first?
I think it is very possible that not everybody in the White House or allied to the White House is up to speed on everything that's happened. It's possible that President Trump himself was not aware of this meeting or what was discussed in it, either beforehand or afterwards. The problem is they have been eating up any benefit of the doubt that people would give them based on each of them making statements. So many people from the administration, so many of its allies are making statements that turn out to be false. Earlier this week, for example, Jay Sekulow was saying that President Trump had only the day before heard about these emails. Well, then it turned out that actually he had okayed the release over last weekend about those emails.
Jeffrey, 40 seconds left. But if there was collusion, wouldn't it have been a little bit more ship-shape? This was an email that came from a music promoter. I mean, it was kind of a chaotic affair.
It's John le Carre meets the Marx Brothers, I think.
Bullwinkle and
yeah, it's right. It's Natasha, Boris and Natasha here. No. I mean, literally, you know, each day this week we saw. It turns out there was another Russian intelligence agent in this meeting. It was literally like the Marx Brothers, the Night of the Opera, the stateroom scene, where you're just shoving more and more people into this room. Yes and no. I mean, you can have collusion, and it could be incompetent collusion as well. It doesn't, just because you can't execute collusion well doesn't mean it's not collusion. I think that's what we're seeing here. Also, at this point, going to this issue of credibility, who knows what's going to come out next week? We don't have any idea.
All right, we're going to leave it there. We've got more. I'm going to ask the panel to stay right here, and we'll be back to them later in the broadcast. Next, a look at some moments in politics when politicians turn down the opportunity for some opposition research. And we're back with our panel. Susan Page of USA Today, Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, Ed O'Keefe of The Washington Post, and Ramesh Ponnuru of National Review. Susan, I want to start with you. Before this revelation, when we talked to White House officials, about any connection between Russia and any Trump officials. They said, almost, how dare you even ask the question? This is a smear to suggest that anybody would have been connected at all. The vice president reacted that way. So did Kellyanne Conway. Because for them, it was out of bounds, the whole notion. Now that there is a proof that the president's son was anxious to go to a meeting with someone who was advertised as a Russian agent, well, no big deal. That seems hard to switch that quickly. It's
such a big lie to say we did that, but now you found out we did that and it's just not a big deal. Yes, I think that's a hard needle to thread, and it puts people like Mike Pence in a terrible situation because he has misrepresented something that we now know, we assume unknowingly. Think about the position it puts congressional Republicans in, who the White House wants to defend them on this issue and help them on other issues. And yet even Jay Sekulow seems very reluctant to get out very far ahead in responding to your questions because no one is quite sure what is going to turn up next week.
And Ramesh, let me ask you, the president said, well, anybody would have taken this meeting. I would guess that some Kellyanne Conway, Sean Spicer, Reince Priebus, I'm not sure they would have taken a meeting with somebody advertised as a Russian government agent.
Well, you know, one thing that's been really notable is that you don't have campaign officials from previous Republican campaigns coming forward and say, yes, this is routine. We took meetings like this all the time. Nobody from McCain world or Romney world or George W. Bush world is saying anything of the type because, in fact, it's highly unusual. What you are not getting, though, interestingly, is a unified public line from the strong supporters of the president. Some of them are saying, nothing to see here, no big deal, this is totally appropriate. Some of them are saying it was inappropriate, sure, but everybody does it. Some of them are saying Donald Trump Jr. was somehow set up. There is a complete cacophony. They have not managed to, maybe they were trying to coordinate with the Russians, they're not coordinating with one another.
It is also, Jeffrey, interesting to see, I mean, it was Mitt Romney's position about the Russians as far back as the last election, that they were the #1 geopolitical foe, and that now to see some people arguing, not that big a deal, that, you know, Russians, well, they're just like the Ukrainians, but they weren't at this point in 2016.
Well, something's happened on the right in America in which Putin has been reimagined and Russia's been reimagined as a stalwart Christian nation opposing radical Islam. That was not Jay Sekulow's viewpoint as of last year, by the way. But there is a counter movement in certain circles of the right that says Russia is our natural ally. And this obviously is in Russia's best interest to have this argument. It is certainly not, it certainly has not been a mainstream Republican argument, which is why most Republicans would have said, really, you want me to meet with a Russian agent during a campaign? You got to be kidding.
I mean, this is starting to calcify now among devoted Republicans. While 60% of Americans now think Russia tried to influence the election in the new Washington Post ABC poll out this morning, and 44% think Trump benefited directly from that attempt. If you look at Republicans, the number of them, or Republican-leaning independents who think the Russians sought to influence the election and that the Trump team intentionally helped, has dropped to just 9% of Republicans. So a majority of them now are on the president's side, think that all of this is just designed to discredit him from a partisan perspective. Well, the rest of the country is like, no, there's just some real serious problems here. That's why Jay Sekulow feels he can come out here, pull what is now known as the full Sekulow, show up on all the shows this morning defending the president, and say what he's saying because he knows that the president's base is still with him. And there's nothing that has come out yet that really
will change that.
Pokes at that at all.
Let's go back to policy and the things people care about in their daily lives, Susan Page, and that's this health care bill. It's now been delayed a week. Is Senator Paul right that this will cause more people to drop off? How do you think this will play out?
So we're waiting for Senator McCain to get better and come back down. He's not said he's going to vote for this bill. He hasn't said he'll even support the motion to proceed to allow the debate to go forward. I mean, that's in what trouble this bill is. It's not inconceivable that it would pass, but no bill with this low of support with the public no major bill has ever been enacted in U.S. history since we started polling. It's just very hard to get members of Congress looking at their own reelection in many cases next year to put themselves on the line for a bill that is so unpopular and unpopular, not supported even by a majority of Republicans. And the really bad news, it seems to me, for President Trump is this is his sweet spots politically. He still has the support of people who voted for him. He still has Republican control of the House and the Senate. There may become a time in a year where that is no longer the case.
Ramesh, why is this so hard?
Well, it's hard because, for one thing, there are only 52 Republican senators. There were 60 Democratic senators at the time that Obamacare passed, and so it's just going to be hard. You need almost every single Republican vote. Republicans have tried to rush this through, and they've repeatedly found that they need more time to get it through. And then one last thing. Because it's sort of a cobbled together piece of legislation, nobody actually loves it. Yeah. There's nobody who's out there day in, day out making the case for it, pushing back widespread misrepresentations of it the way that other major legislation of this type usually has.
It's an orphan bill, as our colleague Paul Kane put it this week in a column. And look, Susan Collins this morning, Rand Paul suggested it, John McCain suggested it Friday before this news came out. They want to see this go back to regular order. Send it back, which means putting it back in the committees and letting them hash it out in public and let it drag out the way Schoolhouse Rock tells us it's supposed to happen. And the reason is they believe they've seen the failure of the Affordable Care Act and the fact that it was put together just by Democrats. They know, I talk to them on a regular basis, that there are Democrats out there who want to work with Republicans on this and vice versa, on prescription drug prices, on the access to this, on allowing people to buy across state lines. And there are proposals to do that. It's just they haven't been given the space and the time and the authority to do it.
Jeffrey, what's your assessment of the president's role here? He is our first marketer president. Or, that may not be true, but he is that is his key skill.
But he would like you to say that, I guess.
He has been successful in private business because he is such a great marketer.
He sells.
And so what's the...
Well, this is one of the mysteries at the heart of this whole episode is this. Why is he more or less AWOL? And I think it is a mystery. I don't think we understand everything about this. But I would say that there's a very good chance that he and his people don't want him out there talking about it because he isn't really good at talking about it and would get trapped in the details. I think that's one. I also think, and this is pure speculation, but I think that he's probably ambivalent about this bill and the nature of it and the idea. I mean, he might actually believe the CBO scoring. His people around him officially don't believe it, but he might believe it. And it goes to the even larger question about the missed opportunities of the first 6 months of this administration, which is here's a man who's not really a Republican, doesn't owe that much to the party, is not a Democrat either, can legislate, can lead in a populist way, hasn't done infrastructure, hasn't expanded medical care for the kind of people who voted for him. There's a lot of mysteries inside this mystery.
Pick up on that, Susan. I am struck that one of the things they put in the Senate bill is some more money for the opioid crisis. The president campaigned on that. When you think of the forgotten man that he talked about in his inaugural address, what you don't hear so much is people saying, boy, you know, we tried to talk to the president about something else, but he kept coming back to the forgotten man. And what is this bill going to do for the forgotten man? And let's keep the focus on that. This was something that had to be added in by the Senate. It seems that the thing that brought him to Washington is not his primary focus in terms of this legislation.
But I don't think his primary focus are the details and repercussions of the legislation. No, I think he just wants a bill to sign. What has he said several times? I have my pen in hand and I'm ready for them to send me a bill and I'll sign it. Not, I have a plan in mind that I think is important to fix the American health system. And you ask, Ramesh, why healthcare is hard? Healthcare is hard because there are trade-offs. You know, everybody doesn't win on healthcare. If you're going to cover more people, it's going to cost more. If you're going to cover, if you're going to have equal treatment for people with pre-existing conditions, it means healthy people are going to pay more. That's the trade-off that we continue to have trouble with as a nation in figuring out what exactly we want to do.
Ramesh, let me just ask you a quick question about repercussions. If the Republicans don't repeal the Affordable Care Act after 7 years, isn't that something that they have to worry about in terms of political backlash?
I think it becomes intensely demoralizing to Republicans, even if those Republicans don't, as I said, love this bill, to hear that the Republicans haven't done anything on it. And I think that the great danger they face going into the midterms, that any party does facing midterm elections when they're in power in the White House, is that they've got a demoralized base and the other side is revved up.
And what about the rest of the Republican agenda? Is this like a train? You can't go anywhere if the first car
Pretty much,
crashes?
and it's incredible how a one-track minded Congress has become. Well, the House is working on some, there's a big defense bill that has to get done, and they're starting to think about a spending plan by the end of September. There are a lot of big things that need to get done. There's only about 21 days left on the House calendar, 37 on the Senate calendar by the end of September when all of these things come due. That's part of why McConnell decided to extend the summer recess into August this week. John McCain was part of the reason that happened. He wants to get his defense bill that he oversees as head of the Armed Services Committee done as a way to demonstrate that they're doing something. And yet now, because of his surgery, they may have to stick around even longer.
Finally, to you, Jeffrey, the president said he would be angry if this doesn't pass. What do you think the president's reaction will be if it doesn't pass?
You know, he'll just move on to make America great again. I mean, remember, he's not. He'll find a way to blame the media. He'll find a way to blame the Democrats. I don't think his heart is in this. It is an amazing moment, and I think this is where he will feel personally insulted and betrayed by the Republicans. Republican president, Republican House, Republican Senate cannot undo Obamacare. Really, he'll be judged as having an historically bad first year. Put aside Russia, put aside everything else.
Okay. We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. I want to thank our panel. We'll be back in a moment with a look at the first mission to the moon, Apollo 8.